The massive windows of the Galactic Academy's Xenobiology Lab offered a perfect view of Earth, hanging like a blue and white marble in the darkness of space. 3 students pressed their faces against the glass, their large eyes reflecting the planet's glow. Despite being hundreds of miles above the surface, they could see swirling storm systems moving across the oceans. "It doesn't look that dangerous," Blue said, adjusting his environmental suit's settings. As the team leader, he had been the one to suggest Earth for their final research project. His silvery skin shimmered under the Academy's lights as he turned to face his teammates. Stone crossed all 4 of his arms and shook his head. "The records say it's a Class 12 deathworld. But I think those classifications are from the old days. Our technology is much better now." Reed, the smallest of the 3, was already checking their equipment. Her transparent outer membrane pulsed with nervous energy as she calibrated their sensors. "The atmospheric pressure alone is crushing, and the temperature swings are extreme. We'll need to be careful." The door to the lab slid open with a soft hiss. Professor Gray floated in, his tentacles gently pushing him forward in the low-gravity environment. The old teacher's usual purple color had faded to a worried pale lavender. "Students, I've reviewed your project proposal," Gray said, his voice translating through their universal communicators. "I must advise against choosing Earth. There are plenty of Class 3 or 4 planets that would be suitable for your research." Blue stepped forward respectfully. "Professor, with all due respect, anyone can study a normal planet. We want to understand why Earth is classified as it is. The humans live there without any protection. How is that possible?" "That's exactly what makes it so dangerous," Gray warned, wrapping a tentacle around a nearby support beam to anchor himself. "The humans have evolved in conditions that would kill most species in the galaxy. Their bodies can withstand radiation levels that would cook us alive. They can survive in temperatures that range from freezing to boiling. They can break bones and heal them. They can lose entire limbs and continue fighting." Stone's confident posture wavered slightly. "Those are just stories, aren't sure. Exaggerations from the first contact reports." Professor Gray's color darkened to a deep purple. "I've been there. Once. Just once. That was enough." He paused, all 8 of his eyes blinking in sequence. "But I can see you've made up your minds. At least promise me you'll follow all safety protocols." "Of course, Professor," Reed chirped, holding up their latest model environmental suits. "We've got the best protection available. Triple-layered force fields, atmospheric filters, and emergency teleporters if anything goes wrong." The professor drifted closer to examine their equipment. After a thorough inspection, he sighed, releasing a small cloud of worried pheromones. "Your research pod is ready in Docking Bay 7. Remember, no direct contact with humans unless absolutely necessary. Observe only. And whatever you do, don't let your suits fail. Earth's raw atmosphere would dissolve your bodies in minutes." The 3 students nodded eagerly, already gathering their equipment. They had spent months preparing for this mission, studying Earth's bizarre conditions and the even stranger creatures that called it home. Their research pod was specially designed to withstand the planet's crushing gravity and violent weather patterns. As they headed for the docking bay, Professor Gray called after them one last time. "And students, if you do meet any humans," he paused, his color shifting to an almost white shade of worry, "don't challenge them. Don't threaten them. Don't even startle them. They're not just surviving on a death world. They're thriving on it. Remember that." The students exchanged excited glances as they boarded their pod. They had read all the warnings, studied all the data, but surely, they thought, surely it couldn't be as bad as everyone said. After all, they were using the most advanced technology in the galaxy. What could possibly go wrong on a simple research mission? As their pod detached from the Academy and began its descent toward the blue planet below, none of them noticed the small warning light blinking on Reed's atmospheric sensor. They were about to learn exactly why Earth had earned its fearsome reputation. The research pod shuddered as it entered Earth's atmosphere. Warning lights flashed across the control panel as the craft fought against gravity far stronger than anything the students had experienced before. Blue's fingers danced across the controls, making constant adjustments to keep them stable. The gravity is pulling us down at 9.8 meters per second squared. Reed called out, her membrane flickering with stress patterns. That's nearly double what we prepared for in the simulations. Stone gripped his seat with all four arms. The atmospheric pressure is crushing. How do humans move around in this? Their pod broke through the cloud layer, revealing a vast landscape below. White-capped mountains stretched toward the sky, and dense forests covered the ground as far as they could see. A layer of snow blanketed everything, reflecting the morning sunlight with blinding intensity. Landing zone identified, Blue announced, guiding their pod toward a small clearing. Welcome to what the humans call Alaska. The pod touched down with a soft thud, immediately sinking several inches into the snow. The external sensors began feeding data to their screens, and all three students stared in disbelief at the readings. Temperature is -15 degrees Celsius, Reed reported, her voice shaking. The humans call this winter. They continue to function in these conditions. Stone ran a diagnostic on his environmental suit, activating all thermal protection layers. I can't believe anything could evolve to survive these temperature swings. Blue activated the pod's external cameras, scanning their surroundings. The forest around them was quiet, covered in pristine snow. Everything looked peaceful, but the students knew better than to trust appearances on a Class 12 deathworld. Remember Professor Gray's warnings, Blue said, checking his emergency teleporter. We observe only. No direct contact unless. A thunderous crash interrupted him. The entire pod shook as something massive moved through the trees nearby. The students froze, their bodies instinctively shifting to camouflage colors, despite being safely inside their pod. Through the viewport, they watched as an enormous brown creature emerged from the forest. It stood taller than their pod, with massive branching antlers and legs thick as tree trunks. Steam puffed from its nostrils as it regarded their pod with casual interest. "What is that monster?" Stone whispered, all four hands clutching his data recorder. Reed quickly searched their database. It's called a moose, an herbivore. This planet's plant eaters are bigger than our largest predators. The moose snorted, its breath creating clouds in the frigid air. It took a step toward their pod, and the students could feel each footfall vibrate through the ground. The creature's sheer mass seemed to defy physics. If this is an herbivore, Blue said, his silver skin turning a pale shade of white, imagine what the predators must be like. As if answering his question, a long, haunting howl echoed through the forest. The moose's ears twitched, and it quickly moved away from their pod, disappearing into the trees with surprising speed for its size. Was that? Stone's voice trailed off as more howls joined the first. Reed checked their sensors. Multiple life forms approaching. They're hunting in a group. The database calls them wolves. Stay in the pod, Blue ordered, though neither of his teammates showed any intention of leaving. We'll observe from here. Through their viewport, they watched as shadows moved between the trees. The howls grew closer, and the students huddled together, grateful for the pod's protection. They had been on Earth for less than an hour, and already they were witnessing the brutal reality of this death world. Maybe, Stone said quietly, those old classification reports weren't exaggerated after all. A wolf emerged from the forest, its yellow eyes fixing directly on their pod. Despite the bitter cold, despite the crushing gravity and harsh conditions, the predator moved with confident grace. It was perfectly adapted to this hostile environment, and that thought made the students shudder. They were about to learn that on Earth, even the simplest research mission could become a fight for survival. The wolves circled the research pod for what felt like hours. The students watched in nervous fascination as the predators communicated through a series of growls and body language, coordinating their movements with frightening intelligence. Their pack behavior is remarkable, Reed whispered, even though the wolves couldn't possibly hear them inside the pod. Look how they're testing our defenses. Blue was about to respond when a sharp whistle cut through the air. The wolves' ears perked up, and they quickly retreated into the forest. A moment later, a tall figure emerged from the trees, walking casually through the deep snow. "It's a human," Stone gasped, all four hands pressed against the viewport. "And it's not wearing any protection." The human was dressed in what their database identified as winter gear, but to the students, it looked impossibly thin and fragile compared to their environmental suits. He carried a long stick over one shoulder and had facial hair covered in frost. The human approached their pod directly, showing no fear or hesitation. He raised one hand in what their systems identified as a peaceful greeting. "Maybe we should leave," Reed suggested, her membrane rippling with anxiety. Professor Gray said no direct contact. A loud knock on their pod's hull made them all jump. The human's voice came through their external sensors. "You folks all right in there? This isn't the best spot for parking." After a moment of panicked silence, Blue activated the pod's external communicator. "We are research students observing local wildlife." The human nodded, seeming completely unfazed by talking to aliens. "Name's Jack. I'm a ranger in these parts. Your ship's setting off my wildlife monitors. Might want to move it before the bears wake up." "Bears?" Stone asked, quickly searching their database. His color paled considerably at the results. "Yeah, got a couple of grizzlies that den near here. They get pretty grumpy if you wake them up early." Jack adjusted his pack with casual ease, despite the crushing gravity. "I can show you a better spot for observation, if you'd like." The students huddled together for a quick discussion. Their mission required studying Earth's environment, and who better to guide them than a local? But the idea of leaving their pod— "We must maintain full environmental protection," Blue said firmly, checking his suit's seals for the third time. "The atmosphere here is toxic to us." Jack just shrugged, frost falling from his shoulders. "Fine by me. But you might want to hurry. Storm's coming in." Reed checked their instruments. "I don't see any atmospheric disturbance." "Feel it in my bones," Jack interrupted, pointing to dark clouds gathering over the mountains. "That's a big one. 3, maybe 4 feet of snow coming. Temperature's gonna drop about 30 degrees. The students stared at him in horror. Not only could humans survive in these conditions, but they could predict them through their bodies alone. "We accept your guidance," Blue decided quickly. "Our pod can hover above the snow." As they activated the pod's anti-gravity systems, Jack started walking, completely unconcerned by the darkening sky or dropping temperature. The students followed in their pod, keeping their sensors focused on their strange guide. "He's maintaining normal movement in -20 degrees Celsius," Reed reported, watching their instruments. "Heart rate steady, no signs of distress." "Look at his clothing," Stone added. "Simple fabric layers. No force fields, no temperature regulators, no gravity compensators." Jack stopped at the edge of a ridge, pointing to a sheltered valley below. "You can set up there. Good view of the valley, and the trees'll break the worst of the wind." "The wind?" Blue asked nervously. A powerful gust rocked their pod, making them all grab for support. Jack didn't even sway, his feet planted firmly in the snow as if the earth itself anchored him. "Yep," he grinned, ice crystals forming in his beard. "Welcome to Alaska in winter. Hope you brought snacks. You're about to see why we call this wilderness." The students exchanged worried looks. They were starting to understand that on Earth, even the planet's caretakers were as untamed as its environment. The storm hit faster than the students thought possible. One moment they were hovering in their pod, watching Jack set up what he called a camp in the valley. The next, the world vanished in a whiteout of howling wind and stinging snow. "These readings can't be right," Reed said, tapping frantically at her instruments. The temperature dropped 15 degrees in 20 minutes. Blue struggled to keep the pod stable as another gust of wind slammed into them. "Stone, What's happening to our shields? Ice is forming on them, Stone reported, all four hands working different control panels. The moisture in the air is freezing directly onto our hull. We're gaining weight. Outside, Jack stood up from where he'd been building something in the snow. He cupped his hands around his mouth and shouted over the wind. Your ship's not looking too good. Better land and wait this out. Land? In this. Blue watched in horror as their external cameras showed the snow was now falling sideways. We'll be buried. That's the idea. Jack pointed to what he'd been building. A shelter dug into a snowbank and reinforced with fallen branches. Snow's the best insulator we've got out here. The pod shuddered violently as another layer of ice formed on their shields. Warning lights flashed across the control panel, and a low power alarm began to beep. The anti-gravity system is using too much power fighting the ice weight, Reed announced, her membrane pulsing with emergency colors. We have to land or we'll lose all systems. Blue carefully lowered the pod next to Jack's snow shelter. The human immediately began packing snow around their base, working efficiently despite the bitter cold and wind that would have killed the students in seconds if they stepped outside. Your homeworld must be even harsher than this, Stone said through their external speakers, watching Jack work. Jack laughed, his breath freezing instantly in the air. Nah, I'm just a regular guy from Seattle, but my grandparents taught me how to survive out here. Watch this. You're about to see some real Earth magic. He ducked into his shelter and emerged with something in his hands. The students gasped as Jack created fire with nothing but what he called matches and some dry wood he'd collected. Impossible, Reed whispered, recording everything. He's controlling plasma with primitive tools. The fire grew stronger, and Jack fed it carefully, building what he called a campfire just outside the entrance to his snow shelter. The heat sensors on their pod registered the dramatic temperature difference the fire created. You students might have fancy ships, Jack said, settling down next to his fire, but sometimes the old ways work best. The storm's getting stronger. Might as well share some stories while we wait. As if to emphasize his words, thunder cracked overhead. Another shock for the students, who didn't know storms could include electrical discharges in freezing conditions. How? Blue started, then tried again. How do humans live like this? Always one step from death. Jack poked at his fire thoughtfully. Maybe that's why we live like this. Every challenge makes us stronger. Every storm teaches us something new. He grinned up at their pod. Besides, you haven't even seen the really dangerous stuff yet. There's worse than this, Stone asked, his color fading to a pale gray. Oh yeah, this is just a regular winter storm. Wait until you see what we call extreme weather. Jack pulled something from his pack, a simple container of what he called coffee, and held it over the fire. But don't worry. If things get really bad, I know a few tricks that'll keep us alive. The students watched in amazed horror as Jack continued his tasks, completely at ease in conditions their advanced technology was struggling to handle. They were beginning to understand that on Earth, survival wasn't about having the best equipment. It was about knowing how to use whatever you had. The storm raged through the night, but that wasn't what woke the students. It was the sudden, terrifying sound of their pod's environmental systems powering down. Emergency power only, Blue shouted, his fingers flying over the dead control panel. What happened to our main reactor? Reed checked the diagnostics on her backup tablet. The cold. It's affecting the reactor's core. The temperature dropped below our equipment's operating threshold. Stone, who had been monitoring their environmental suits systems, let out a worried chirp. Our suits are showing the same power drain. We have maybe 2 hours of life support left. Outside their failing pod, Jack's fire still burned steadily, creating a warm circle of light in the darkness. The human had been awake, watching the storm with what looked like enjoyment on his face. When he heard the strange sounds from their pod, he stood up and approached. Having technical difficulties? He asked, brushing snow from his jacket as if it were nothing more than a minor inconvenience. Our technology isn't designed for these extremes, Blue admitted through their external speakers, which were now running on backup power. We need help. Jack nodded, showing no surprise at their predicament. Your ship's too cold. Need to warm it up from the outside first. But we'll have to be careful. Sudden temperature changes might crack your hull. The students watched in fascination as Jack began building what he called a snow wall around their pod, leaving an opening facing his fire. He worked methodically, packing the snow tight, creating an insulated barrier against the wind. The principles are simple, he explained as he worked. Snow traps air pockets. Air pockets insulate. Same way animals survive up here. Animals? Reed asked, recording everything despite their power crisis. You mean Earth creatures live in these conditions without any technology? Sure do. Arctic foxes, snow hares, even tiny voles under the snow. They adapt. Jack finished the wall and stepped back to examine his work. Speaking of adapting, you might need to leave your ship soon. Those suits of yours look pretty high-tech, but I'm guessing they're not doing too well either. The students looked at each other in horror. Leave their pod. Experience Earth's environment with only their suits between them and certain death. A loud crack echoed through the pod, making them all jump. Warning lights flashed across their suits' displays. The power drain was accelerating. 1 hour of life support remaining, Stone announced, his voice shaking. Blue, what do we do? Blue looked at their failing systems, then at Jack, who waited patiently outside. The human had survived out there for hours with nothing but layers of fabric and his own knowledge. Could they learn to do the same? We have to trust him, Blue decided. Our technology is failing, but he knows how to survive here naturally. Jack helped them exit the pod one by one. The students stumbled in the heavy gravity, their suits growing stiffer by the minute as their power reserves dropped. The cold hit them like a physical force, even through their protective layers. Easy now, Jack said, leading them to his fire. First lesson in Earth survival, respect the cold, but don't fear it. Fear makes you stupid, and stupid gets you killed. He showed them how to sit close to the fire without overheating their suits, how to move efficiently in the deep snow, and most importantly, how to stay calm when every instinct told them to panic. Our suits have 30 minutes left, Reed reported, her membrane showing stress patterns that matched the falling snowflakes. Then we've got 30 minutes to teach you how to survive on Earth, Jack said with a confident smile. Trust me. If my ancestors could do this with stone tools and animal skins, you can do it with those fancy suits. The students huddled closer to the fire, watching their power levels drop while the storm howled around them. They were about to learn the most important lesson Earth had to teach. Sometimes survival meant letting go of everything you thought you knew. As their suit power dropped to critical levels, the 3 students huddled around Jack's fire, watching him add branches with practiced ease. The storm had weakened, but the temperature continued to fall. Reed's scientific instruments, running on their last bits of power, showed an astonishing -40 degrees Celsius. I don't understand, Stone said, all 4 arms wrapped around himself. How are you still functioning? The energy required to maintain body heat in these conditions should be enormous. Jack poked the fire thoughtfully. Humans are weird that way. Our bodies adapt. Right now, my metabolism is running high. My blood vessels are constricted to preserve core heat, and my liver is working overtime. He grinned. At least, that's what the doctors tell me. I just call it winter camping. Blue, who had been unusually quiet, suddenly straightened up. That's it. Reed, check the biological readings we took earlier. Compare them to Jack's current status. Reed pulled out her tablet, using its last moments of power to analyze the data. Her membrane flickered with excitement. It's incredible. Jack's body is automatically adjusting to the conditions. His cellular structure is actually changing to combat the cold. Not just me, Jack said, pointing to tracks in the snow near their shelter. Look there. Arctic fox passed by an hour ago, probably checking us out. Its body does the same thing. adapts to whatever nature throws at it. Stone studied the tracks with newfound interest. But Earth throws so much at its creatures. The gravity, the temperature swings, the atmospheric pressure. Exactly. Blue interrupted, his silver skin pulsing with the excitement of discovery. We've been thinking about Earth all wrong. It's not a death world because it kills everything that lives here. It's a death world because only the strongest, most adaptable life forms can survive here in the first place. Reed's tablet finally died, but she barely noticed. The constant challenges, they force evolution to create incredible solutions. Every creature here, from the smallest bacteria to humans themselves, has to be extraordinary just to exist. Jack nodded, adding more wood to the fire. Nature's pretty good at solving problems. Take this fire, for example. Humans didn't invent it. We learned it from lightning strikes. We just figured out how to control it. Your species learned to harness plasma by observing natural phenomena. Stone asked incredulously. That's Earth for you, Jack chuckled. Everything here is trying to kill you, so you either get smart or you don't survive. We learned from everything around us. Animal fur taught us about insulation. Bird wings taught us about flight. Even these snow shelters, we copied them from Arctic animals. Blue's suit power finally failed, but he hardly noticed the chill that crept in. His mind was racing with understanding. Professor Gray was right, but not in the way he thought. Earth isn't dangerous because it's hostile to life. It's dangerous because it creates life that can overcome any obstacle. Jack stood up, stretching casually in the brutal cold. Speaking of obstacles, your suits are about dead, and we've got 6 hours until sunrise. Time for your next lesson in Earth survival. How to stay warm when technology fails. As the students watched Jack begin to teach them basic survival skills, they understood something profound. Earth wasn't just a planet that dealt death. It was a forge that created life tough enough to laugh in death's face. The galaxy fears Earth, Reed whispered, watching Jack demonstrate how to properly layer clothes against the cold, because they don't understand it. Everything here has evolved to be incredibly resilient. Even the simplest Earth life forms would be considered extreme on other worlds. And the humans, Stone added, they're the ones who mastered it all. No wonder the galaxy calls this a death world. Any species that could evolve here would have to be extraordinary. Blue nodded, finally understanding their professor's warnings. Earth wasn't a prison of death. It was a crucible of life, creating creatures that could survive anywhere, adapt to anything, and overcome any challenge. They had come to study Earth's dangers. Instead, they were learning its greatest lesson. True strength comes not from avoiding challenges, but from adapting to overcome them. The main lecture hall of the Galactic Academy fell silent as Blue, Stone, and Reed took their places at the presentation platform. Their environmental suits had been repaired, but they chose to wear the modified versions Jack had helped them design, better adapted to handle extreme conditions. Professor Gray sat in the front row, his tentacles curled with worry. The last time he'd seen his students, they were heading to Earth in a brand new research pod. They'd returned 3 days later in a battered vessel, covered in primitive Earth materials, and speaking of their experience with an enthusiasm that concerned him deeply. Honored faculty and students, Blue began, his silver skin gleaming under the Academy lights. We went to Earth expecting to study why it's classified as a death world. We returned with a completely new understanding of what that classification truly means. The holographic display behind them activated, showing their pod buried in snow as the storm raged around it. Several audience members gasped at the brutal conditions. Our technology failed us, Stone explained, using all 4 arms to gesture at the image. Our advanced environmental systems, our power cores, even our emergency backup systems, all defeated by what the locals called a mild winter storm. Reed stepped forward, her membrane displaying calm, professional patterns. But this failure taught us something crucial. Earth isn't just a planet with harsh conditions. It's a crucible that forces life to become incredibly resilient. The display changed to show their biological readings of various Earth creatures, including Jack. The data scrolled past, each measurement more incredible than the last. "Look at these adaptation capabilities," Blue pointed out. "Earth life forms don't just survive in different conditions. They actively change themselves to thrive in them. Their cellular structures alter. Their metabolism shifts. Their very bodies transform to meet each challenge." Stone activated another display, showing Jack teaching them how to build a snow shelter. The humans are the most remarkable of all. They didn't evolve specialized adaptations like thick fur or hibernation abilities. Instead, they developed something far more powerful: the ability to learn from everything around them. They learned to control fire by studying lightning, Reed added. They learned to stay warm by observing Arctic animals. They learned to predict weather by watching patterns in nature. Every challenge Earth presented, they turned into an opportunity to grow stronger. Professor Gray raised a tentacle. "But surely this proves how dangerous Earth is. No species should need such extreme adaptations just to survive." "That's what we thought at first," Blue replied with a new confidence that surprised his teacher. "But we were wrong. Earth isn't a death world because it kills everything that lives there. It's a death world because it creates life forms capable of surviving anywhere." The final display showed their readings from the storm, when their technology had failed, and they had to rely on basic survival skills taught by Jack. "We survived temperatures that should have killed us," Stone said proudly. "Not because of our technology, but because we learned to adapt, just like Earth's creatures do every day." "Our recommendation to the Academy," Reed concluded, "is to change how we think about Earth. Yes, it's a death world, but not because it's hostile to life. It's a death world because it creates the toughest, most adaptable life forms in the galaxy." As the presentation ended, the lecture hall erupted in discussion. Professor Gray noticed something different about his students: a new confidence, a deeper understanding. They had gone to Earth as academic observers and returned to something more. "One last question," he asked, floating up to the platform. "Would you go back?" The three students exchanged glances, remembering the brutal cold, the crushing gravity, the constant challenges. Then they smiled. "In a heartbeat," Blue answered. "After all, Earth has so much more to teach us. And next time," he patted his modified environmental suit, "we'll be better adapted." As the students filed out of the lecture hall, their report was already being transmitted across the galaxy. Soon, everyone would understand. Earth wasn't just a world that dealt death. It was a world that had mastered life itself.